All right, everyone, welcome back. Today we are going deep, and I mean deep, into a book that's, well, let's just say it's a real mind bender.
Yeah, we're tackling Jean Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation. Not exactly light beach reading.
Definitely not. But even though it's a challenging read, it's packed with these aha moments, the kind that make you see the world a little differently.
For sure. It's one of those books that once you get it, you start to see its ideas everywhere.
Exactly. And that's why we're doing this deep dive. So, ready to have your perception of reality, like, totally flipped?
Let's do it. This is going to be fun.
Okay, so at the heart of simulacra and simulation is this idea that the map now precedes the territory.
Whoa. Okay. Right off the bat. Classic Baudrillard.
Right. But think about it. He's saying that these days, it's like the map, the representation of a place, it doesn't just describe the place anymore. It actually starts to define it.
Okay. I think I'm starting to see where this is going.
Like, think about social media, right? Instagram, TikTok, whatever. You're creating this curated version of yourself, your life, and it's not exactly fake, but
But it becomes this whole other thing separate from the real you, the real life.
yeah. And sometimes that online persona, it can even feel more real, more you than what you're actually experiencing offline.
It's of like which is the simulation and which is the actual territory at that point. It gets blurry.
And that's exactly what Baudrillard is getting at. He calls this shift from representation to simulation the creation of a desert of the real, where the lines between what's authentic and what's fabricated, they get all messed up.
And that's a scary thought, right? Like, does that mean reality itself is disappearing?
Well, not necessarily. It's more like our ability to see it clearly, to tell it apart from all these simulations, that's what starts to break down.
Okay, so it's not that reality is gone, but our grasp on it is getting slippery.
Exactly. Think of it like those crazy realistic video games we have now.
Yeah.
You know, it's not real life, but
But it feels real when you're in it, like
yeah,
emotionally engaging even.
totally. And that's what makes Baudrillard's work so mind-blowing. It forces us to confront this blurring of boundaries. If we're surrounded by simulations, how can we even define what real even means?
Right, and I think that's what's so relevant about his work, even more so now than when he was writing, because we're swimming in simulations these days.
Absolutely. And the thing is, as Baudrillard argues, these simulations, they aren't just neutral background noise. They actually influence how we see the world, how we act.
It's not passive. It gets in your head, shapes your understanding even.
And he uses some really interesting examples to illustrate this whole thing. Like, for instance, Disneyland. Disneyland, huh? Okay. So the happiest place on earth, sure. But how does this tie into all this simulacra stuff?
Well, for Baudrillard, Disneyland, it's like this perfect example of what he calls a deterrence machine.
Deterrence machine. Okay. Sounds kind of ominous. What that's supposed to mean?
Well, it's like, think about it. Disneyland, it's this totally fabricated reality, right?
Obviously, it's all castles and pirates and cartoon characters.
Exactly. It's hyper real. And because it's so over the top fake, it actually kind of tricks us, makes us think that everything outside of Disneyland, the real world,
Is somehow more real by comparison.
yeah, exactly. We see this super duper constructed reality, and it makes the regular world seem more authentic.
So it's like Disneyland is this weird reassurance. Like, don't worry, the real world is still out there somewhere, probably.
Exactly. But the thing is, as Baudrillard argues, the lines are already blurred. The real world is already full of simulations, even if we don't always see it.
Okay, so it's like Disneyland is this safety valve. It lets us play in this hyperreality, this fantasy land, without actually having to confront the fact that maybe, just maybe.
Maybe our whole world is kind of a simulation already.
Yeah. Whoa, okay. And get this right. The guy who dreamed up this whole simulated world, Walt Disney himself.
He was cryogenically frozen, hoping to be revived in some future world.
Talk about irony.
Yeah.
It's like he created this simulated world and then wanted to freeze himself to preserve some idea of realness. But what if the future is just more simulation?
It's like this deep desire to hold on to the real, even when it's slipping away. And it's not just Disney, right? Think about all those ancient Egyptian mummies.
Oh, yeah. Ramses II, right?
Yeah.
Trying to preserve the body, to cheat death, to hold on to some piece of the past.
Exactly. It's like this urge to make the past, to make history feel real and tangible. But even a perfectly preserved mummy.
It's still just a representation, right?
Yeah, it's taken out of context, put in a museum, and we look at it through these glass cases. And like, is it even real anymore, or is it just a simulation of the past?
And we do this with all sorts of stuff, not just mummies. Like, think about all those replica paintings, those recreations of ancient artifacts.
Right. Are those the real deal, or are they just really, really good copies? And does it even matter at a certain point?
It's like that question of what happens when the copy becomes indistinguishable from, or even better than, the original, which I think is how he gets to this idea of a simulacra, right?
Exactly. The simulacra, it's not just a copy anymore. It's like it takes on a life of its own, and it starts to replace the original in our minds, which.
That's kind of freaky when you really think about it. Like, what happens to our sense of history, of authenticity, when the line between the real and the simulated is totally gone? So, like, where does this all leave us? If we're really living in this world where the simulacra are calling the shots, where nothing is really real anymore, does anything even matter?
Well, Baudrillard, he definitely wrestled with these questions. He even talks about this thought experiment. Like, imagine staging a fake bank robbery.
A fake robbery, okay. I'm not sure I follow.
The idea is it's a perfect simulation, right? Everyone knows it's fake, but
But on some level, people would still freak out, right?
exactly, because even when we know something is a simulation, we still react to that realness, the idea of a totally simulated world where we're all just playing parts.
It's just too much to handle.
Yeah, it's like that reality principle that there's a difference between what's real and what's not. It's so deeply rooted in us, even when it doesn't make sense, we hold on to it.
And this is where that whole implosion of meaning thing comes in, right? It's like the more we try to represent the real, the more information, the more images, the more simulations.
It all just starts to cancel itself out.
Exactly. And it's everywhere you look, right?
Yeah.
Reality TV, where it's all about blurring the lines between what's real and what's performed.
Even the way we treat animals, like in those factory farms, they become these commodities, not even living creatures anymore, really.
It's like this constant flood of information experiences, and it's hard to know what's real, what matters, what's worth caring about.
Yeah, and Baudrillard, he calls this the aesthetic of disappearance. This idea that as the real and the simulated blend together, we're left with this kind of flat, meaningless landscape.
So it's not just that we're losing touch with reality, it's that reality itself is becoming less, well, real.
And it's tough, right? Because if everything is kind of unreal, how do we make choices? How do we form connections, find meaning, purpose?
Big questions. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here today, from our online personas to Disneyland, from Egyptian mummies to bank robberies. The idea that the map shapes the territory, that copies can become more real than the original, that we're drowning in a sea of simulations, it's a lot to process.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there are no easy answers. Baudrillard, he wasn't about giving us a neat little solution. He wanted us to think, to question, to really confront this weird reality we're creating.
So I guess the question for all of us is, how do we navigate this world, this hyperreality where the real and the simulated are constantly blurring together? How do we find our own meaning, make our own choices when everything seems, well, kind of unreal?
That's the challenge, isn't it? And it's one we all have to face together.
And on that note, keep those brain gears turning, everyone. And until next time, happy diving.